Well, hello and good morning, evening or afternoon, depending on when you are watching this, the latest video interview in our Susty Talk series. Launched around a year ago, Susty Talk is designed to keep us all feeling connected to the sustainability conversation throughout lockdown and beyond. And I'm delighted to have Jeff Rhodes from Biffa on the call today. How are you, Jeff?
Hi, great, thank you, Sarah. Glad to join you.
I'm glad to have you along. Are you dialing in from at home today?
Yes, as has been the case pretty much most of the last year, so regular fare now, isn't it, these sort of calls?
Yes, I'm gradually forgetting what my office desk looks like and trying not to think about how many snacks I left in the drawer before we got sent home. Yeah, so I know that we haven't caught up in a while, so it would be great to start out by hearing a little bit about what it's been like to be in your role as head of environment these past 12 months, and what it's been like trying to drive sustainability progress for a company that has been providing a key service throughout these lockdowns.
Yeah, well, obviously last year has been pretty tumultuous, and the sort of two parts of the business really. My part and my team's what you might call back office, and we've sort of largely been working at home for the last year or so. The frontline part of the business with the trucks and processing facilities and disposal facilities and so on, as you said, they've had to keep operating and adapted very quickly to keep that sort of what is an essential service going. So those two halves of the business have actually, once sort of adapted very quickly, have actually worked very well. And I think it's also just reminded people of things you take for granted, such as, daily waste collections and things like that. So it has actually enhanced the reputation and awareness, actually, I think, of the service and the role in society. And in terms of sustainability and some of the investments and things like that, that's just continued to escalate, as it was in the public consciousness and with customers, and in our case as a PLC with investors as well, and international investors. That's just continued to escalate as it was before and through and during. And so the pace of change there and the interest in it has just continued to grow. And fortunately, it's the sort of thing where we are able to do through conferences and meetings and online remote working. So if anything, it's perhaps helped it a little bit with making some of the communications easier instead of spending a lot of time driving around offices in the car and so on. So yes, not been bad once we got used to it.
Yeah, I did look back at some of the press releases I've got this year, and there's been lots of good stuff. So new commitments on electric fleets, new electric vehicle launches, new solar farms on top of landfills, new energy from waste developments. But I wanted to get a feel on whether you think that's been shared across the sector, because we've seen a lot of criticism of the way that the government's approaching the green recovery, and that yes, it's green in that it's low carbon, but how are we looking at this integration with resource management as well?
Yeah, there's a lot of points in there, but I mean, in terms of if I just start with sort of Biffa, and as you said, we launched our first sustainability strategy, which is really focusing on the next 10 years. Certainly not the end of it. That's just to give us something tangible and real to work to over the next 10 years, and then keep building on it from there. And ironically, we just launched that just before we went into lockdown. So what was supposed to be a big real launch in London ended up being an online thing. But it did get a lot of traction, a lot of interest, and a lot of really good feedback. And I think that is because people can resonate with exactly the sort of targets we're talking about. They are real, meaningful things that some of which we've already done. Carbon reductions being something we've been involved in for the last 25 years or so. And your first part of the question there about the sector generally, I think this is and how it sort of ties in with the climate change agenda and government policy and so on. I think this is one of the interesting things, because on a technical level, certainly if you look at the technical reports from government and the Committee on Climate Change and so on, they certainly do recognise the climate change benefits that have been delivered by the waste sector over the last 20 plus years. to the point that it's waste is only 5 or 6% of UK carbon emissions now. But it's gone on almost without being noticed, and you can really date it back, when I say 25 years, to landfill tax, when that came in 25 years ago, 1996, and no massive public interest really at the time, certainly not like there is now. But it was a climate change measure because it was, its whole purpose really was to divert biodegradable waste out of landfill and into recycling to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, and that is why. If you look at our carbon figures and the way we've changed, 65% reduction in carbon emissions over those last 20 years, it's because we've been doing that, diverting waste from landfill into recycling and other forms of management. And it's almost gone on in the background without being noticed. And what seems to have happened now at government level, you've got DEFRA sort of dealing with the resources and waste strategy policies and environment policies, and you've got BEIS dealing with the industrial strategy, and some of that involves investment in green infrastructure and the green recovery and so on. And then you've got HMRC involved as well with the plastics packaging tax being a tax measure, and you've got these it's sort of getting, the stories are getting a bit confused, and you've almost got climate change becoming one discussion, and waste management and plastics and specific things like that becoming another, when actually we just need to pulling that back together. And that's also what we've tried to do in our own strategy, and some of those targets that you can see do join those dots up a bit more.
Mm-hmm. Great, thank you for that. That was a really broad question on my part, so I did want to ask about some of those more specific pieces, and something we've been talking a lot about with end user businesses, that tax that you mentioned on recycled plastics content. We often hear about there being a recycled plastics content shortage at the moment, let alone when the 30% threshold for the tax comes in. So I wanted to get a view on what the waste management sector can do in this regard, and how it can work with the government and with other stages of the value chain on tax changes like this.
Well, that's an interesting one. It's a very specific measure, and I mentioned landfill tax, earlier, and it does seem to be the case that taxes of that type, can actually drive quite a lot of change. And the thing with the plastics tax is that is what it's trying to do. It's that there's recycling is a midstream process, and it's all very well collecting stuff, sorting it out, and even getting it to a really good quality, but there needs to be a buyer for the material at the end of the chain, so that it can go back into material production and replace raw materials, so or raw plastic, virgin polymer in that case. So now, actually, a lot of the investment, if you've seen Biffa's, we've got our own plastics recycling and reprocessing division, Biffa Polymers, which has grown a lot, and we've invested, over £50 million in various elements of that over the last few years. To some degree, that's been supported and will continue to be supported by those sort of tax measures, which are really trying to boost demand for that material in the case of plastics. But it's also been driven in recent years by things like China, stopping accepting UK exports and other people's waste exports, and consumer pressure as well. If you look at sort of black plastic trays and for ready meals and so on, which have almost been phased out completely now by all the major retailers. And that wasn't really driven by anything to do with government policy. It was more, just general media coverage and consumer awareness and consumer pressure. So quite often, I think, where we are now is these things will help, these policy measures will help, but there's already actually a lot being driven either by, through economics and market drivers, commercial opportunities and consumer pressure. So and that's what I hope that plastic tax will do for people who, the whole point of it is to, it will cost producers more if they're not using recycled content, and there will be continued growth and demand for secondary plastics.
Great. So we've talked there about the link between resource management and climate change and the low carbon transition, and about recycling, but I wanted to come on to some other ways of managing resources, so redistribution and waste prevention, and I think this is timely, seeing as that the government tabled a waste prevention programme this week, and one of the releases I got from Biffa is that it's required company shop group.
Yeah.
So I'd love to hear a little bit more about that and how that fits into wider plans around like redistribution and waste prevention.
Yeah, well, that was a really interesting and exciting move for a company like ours, and a novel move, really. So, but it does show, I think, our ambition as a business is that we've never stood still. Over 100 years of operating in the UK, and we've had to adapt to changes in market and environmental regulations and consumer pressures, investor interest, and so on, as I was saying a moment ago. And this is another great example where, if you look at the waste hierarchy, we do loads of recycling, of course, but that's sort of mid-level in the hierarchy. And waste reduction, as you just said, is clearly where you need to start with these things, and designing things to be able to be recycled, genuinely recycled. And this sort of acquisition is the first move in. It's not like we bought lots of other sort of smaller waste management companies and acquisitions over the last couple of years, but this is a different sort of move altogether into that waste reduction and redistribution area. And it was really a perfect fit between the two businesses, because they've got a great commercial business as well as sort of social enterprise through redistributing surplus goods from 500 or so major retailers, some of which are our customers anyway that we deal with their waste. And we could sort of bring that to the party. They've got all of their sort of shops, and they've just opened, I think it was yesterday, the 13th store in Dudley, and there's another 9, I think, stores planned to open over the next 3 or 4 years. And it fits in really ahead of the game, really, in terms of sort of key workers, because it's helping to give the rechanneled sort of surplus, particularly foods and household goods, to workers in key sectors. And also the community shop element of it is a sort of community enterprise that sort of complements that. So really exciting times, and we'll be a part of that in the two companies. It should be very much a hand in glove sort of relationship going forward.
Great. Well, Jeff, that's all the questions I have time for today. So thank you so much for your time.
Okay, lovely to meet you. Thank you.
I will